At the Royal Magic Academy, one test determines your entire future. A single moment where raw magical energy flows through your body, revealing the elemental force that will shape your destiny. Some discover the gentle healing powers of water. Others unleash the destructive might of fire or earth. But what happens when the magic that emerges is something the Academy has never seen before? Today we witness a revelation so dark and powerful that it will change everything we thought we knew about magic and the student who possesses it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Academy's grand testing arena as hundreds of first-year students gathered for the most important day of their magical education. The elemental affinity test wasn't just an exam. It was the moment that would determine class placements, future career paths, and social standing within the prestigious institution. Students whispered nervously among themselves, knowing that their entire lives hung in the balance of this single assessment. Among the crowd stood Cyan, his dark hair catching the light as he mentally prepared himself for what seemed inevitable. Everything about his background pointed toward fire magic, his temperament, his natural instincts, even the way magical energy seemed to simmer beneath his skin. All signs indicated he would join the ranks of the Academy's fire wielders. He had spent weeks visualizing flames dancing around his fingers, imagining the respect that would come with mastering such a powerful and respected element. The testing process was methodical and precise. Students approached the crystalline orb at the center of the arena one by one, placing their hands upon its surface as ancient magic probed their souls. The crystal would glow with the color of their dominant element: blue for water, red for fire, brown for earth, white for air, green for nature. Each result was announced with ceremony, the percentage of affinity determining not just the student's classification, but their potential for greatness. Seth, a confident student with an easy smile, approached the orb before Cyan. The crystal pulsed with brilliant blue light as water magic surged through the testing chamber. 75% water affinity. An impressive score that drew approving nods from the faculty. Seth stepped away beaming, already envisioning his future as a master of aquatic magic. The crowd murmured appreciatively, understanding that such a high percentage meant he would likely become one of the Academy's star pupils. Then came Cyan's turn. He strode forward with practiced confidence, his mind focused on the fire magic he expected to manifest. The moment his palms touched the crystal's smooth surface, however, everything changed. Instead of the warm red glow of fire magic, the crystal erupted with something entirely different. A swirling vortex of deep purple and black energy that seemed to devour the light around it. The darkness didn't just appear, it exploded outward with terrifying intensity. Shadows writhed and danced around Cyan's form like living creatures, responding to his presence with an almost sentient hunger. The very air in the arena seemed to grow colder as the dark energy pulsed with each beat of his heart. Faculty members stepped backward instinctively, their faces shifting from curiosity to alarm. When the magical assessment finally stabilized, the results left everyone speechless. 85% darkness elemental affinity, a score that shouldn't have been possible. Darkness magic was the rarest of all elemental types, so uncommon that many students had never even heard of it being tested. The Academy's records showed perhaps one darkness user every few decades, and none with such overwhelming natural ability. The reaction from his fellow students was immediate and visceral. Some stared in pure amazement at witnessing something they had only read about in ancient texts. Others backed away fearfully, their faces reflecting the deep-seated prejudice against dark magic that permeated magical society. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. Darkness users were dangerous, unpredictable, possibly evil by nature. But this extraordinary manifestation of power wasn't random chance or genetic lottery. As Cyan stood surrounded by the swirling shadows that seemed to recognize him as their master, a terrible truth lay hidden beneath the surface. This wasn't simply the awakening of dormant magical ability. It was the return of skills he had spent years trying to forget. The darkness that now coursed through his veins was intimately familiar because he had wielded it before, not as magic, but as a tool of death. Before arriving at the Royal Magic Academy, before pretending to be just another hopeful young mage, Cyan had lived a completely different existence. He had been trained in the ancient arts of shadow manipulation, taught to move unseen through the darkness, to strike from hiding without leaving a trace. He had been an assassin. The magical energy now flowing through him wasn't creating new abilities. It was awakening techniques he had mastered through years of deadly practice. The shadows that danced around his form recognized their old companion, responding to muscle memory and instincts honed through countless missions in the darkness. Every spell, every manipulation of dark energy felt natural because he had performed similar feats using pure skill and training rather than raw magical power. As news of his unprecedented test results spread through the academy like wildfire, Cyan found himself marked as something far more dangerous than just an unusual student. Faculty members exchanged worried glances, understanding that someone with such powerful darkness affinity would need constant observation. Fellow students began treating him with a mixture of fear and fascination that made normal social interaction nearly impossible. The transformation was complete. Cyan had gone from anonymous student to the Academy's most watched and feared individual in a single moment. But how did a young mage become an assassin? The answer lies in his tragic origins. When we speak of family, we often imagine bonds forged by love, protection, and acceptance. But for some, family becomes the very source of their deepest wounds. This is the story of Cyan, a young man whose bloodline promised everything, yet delivered only betrayal and pain. Cyan entered this world carrying a burden he never chose. He was the bastard son of Duke Aldrich, a powerful nobleman whose ambitions knew no bounds. His mother, Margaret, had been nothing more than a servant who caught the Duke's eye during a moment of fleeting desire. What should have been a secret affair became a permanent reminder when Cyan was born, forever marking both mother and child as complications in the Duke's carefully ordered world. Living in the same castle as his legitimate half-brother Cran felt like existing in two different realities. Cran walked through gilded halls with confidence, receiving the finest tutors, the best weapons training, and most importantly, their father's approval. He was groomed for leadership, praised for his achievements, and celebrated as the future of their noble house. Meanwhile, Cyan lurked in the shadows, watching this life of privilege unfold just beyond his reach. The cruelest twist wasn't his father's indifference, but his mother's resentment. Margaret looked at her son, not with maternal love, but with bitter disappointment. Every time she saw Cyan's face, she was reminded of her ruined reputation, her lost dreams, and the impossible hope she'd once harbored that the Duke might elevate her station. Instead of finding comfort in her child, she saw only the evidence of her greatest mistake. This maternal rejection carved deep wounds into Cyan's developing sense of self-worth, leaving him to wonder if he was truly worthy of anyone's love. The castle servants whispered when they thought he couldn't hear. The legitimate son versus the bastard. The heir versus the accident. These comparisons followed Cyan everywhere, reinforcing his position as perpetually second class, always less than, never quite enough. He learned early that his very existence was seen as an inconvenience, a problem to be managed rather than a person to be cherished. But Duke Aldrich was nothing if not pragmatic. While he would never acknowledge Cyan as a true son, he began to see potential in the boy's desperate hunger for approval. Here was someone already accustomed to shadows, already hardened by rejection, already willing to do anything for the smallest scrap of recognition. The Duke's calculating mind saw opportunity where others saw only obligation. The decision came suddenly, but had clearly been planned for months. Duke Aldrich summoned Cyan to his private study, a room the boy had entered perhaps 3 times in his entire life. Standing before his father's imposing desk, Cyan felt a flutter of hope. Perhaps this was finally his moment of acceptance, his chance to prove himself worthy of the family name. Instead, the Duke outlined a different future entirely. Cyan would be sent away for specialized training. He would learn skills that Cran would never need to master: stealth, infiltration, assassination. The family required someone who could operate beyond the reach of public scrutiny, someone whose actions could never be traced back to their noble house. Someone expendable. The Duke presented this as an honor, a unique role that only Cyan could fill. But the underlying message was crystal clear. While Cran would inherit lands and titles, Cyan would inherit shadows and secrets. He would become a weapon in his father's arsenal, effective but ultimately disposable. The training that followed was unlike anything Cyan could have imagined. Far from the comfortable castle of his birth, he was subjected to brutal conditioning designed to strip away every trace of softness or sentiment. He learned to move without sound, to strike without warning, to manipulate shadows themselves as tools of concealment. Masters of Death taught him anatomy, psychology, and the 100 different ways to end a human life. But perhaps most importantly, they taught him emotional control. The instructors understood that effective assassins couldn't afford the luxury of feeling. They systematically broke down his capacity for trust, for hope, for the basic human connections that might make him hesitate when the moment for action arrived. Cyan emerged from this training transformed, physically capable beyond measure, but emotionally hollowed out, a perfect instrument of violence. Years passed in this crucible of discipline and isolation. Cyan became everything his trainers demanded, silent, deadly, and completely loyal to the family that had sent him away. He told himself that this sacrifice had meaning, that his suffering served a greater purpose in protecting the noble house that bore his blood, even if it would never bear his name. When he finally returned, Cyan harbored secret hopes of recognition, perhaps even acceptance. Despite everything, he still felt genuine affection for Kron, remembering childhood moments when his half-brother had shown him kindness. Those memories sustained him through the darkest periods of training, reminding him that somewhere beneath the politics and hierarchy, real family bonds might still exist. The training duel was meant to be a demonstration, a chance for Cyan to showcase his newly acquired skills. He fought with desperate intensity, pouring years of pent-up emotion into every movement. This was his moment to prove that he belonged, that all his suffering had been worthwhile. Cran's victory was swift and decisive. As Cyan lay defeated in the dirt, his half-brother offered those crushing words. "Better luck next time, little brother." But it was what Cyan discovered afterward that truly shattered his world. Through careful observation and painful investigation, he learned the devastating truth. Cran had been complicit in their father's plan from the very beginning. His beloved half-brother hadn't just known about the assassination training, he had actively supported it. Kron saw Cyan not as family to protect, but as a potential threat to eliminate. The decision to transform him into a weapon hadn't been made despite Cran's feelings, but because of them. This final betrayal broke something fundamental inside Cyan, but it also forged something new. His pain crystallized into unshakable determination. If his family saw him as a weapon, he would become one beyond their wildest imagination. But he would serve no master except himself. Cyan's pain became his strength, but his story was far from over. The world spun violently around Cyan as a kaleidoscope of colors danced before his eyes. One moment he was lying broken and defeated. The next he was gasping for air in a place that felt impossibly familiar. The scent of jasmine flowers filled his nostrils as he staggered to his feet, finding himself standing in the meticulously maintained gardens of the Duke's estate. But this wasn't possible. The estate had been destroyed years ago during the demon raids. His hands trembled as he looked down at them. Young, unmarked by the countless battles he remembered fighting. The elaborate fountain bubbled peacefully nearby, exactly as it had when he was 16. A chill ran down his spine as the impossible truth crashed over him like a tidal wave. Somehow, against all logic and natural law, he had returned to the year 985. He was back in his past, before the betrayals that would define his life, before the assassination attempts, before everything went wrong. The weight of this revelation hit him like a physical blow. This was his second chance, an opportunity that countless souls would kill for. He retained every memory from his previous life, every painful lesson learned through blood and betrayal. His assassin skills remained intact, dormant, but ready to be awakened. Most importantly, he knew exactly what was coming. The duel with Cran was only days away, the moment that had originally sealed his fate as the family disappointment. But this time would be different. This time, he wouldn't simply survive. He would become something far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. Cyan threw himself into training with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Before dawn each morning, he would slip away to a secluded grove beyond the estate grounds. There, hidden from prying eyes, he began forging himself into a weapon. His body, soft from years of neglect in his previous timeline, screamed in protest as he pushed it through grueling exercises. Push-ups until his arms gave out, sprints until his lungs burned, combat drills repeated thousands of times until muscle memory took over. The physical transformation was only the beginning. In secret, he began practicing the darkness magic that had once made him feared across the kingdom. Shadow tendrils responded to his will, dancing between his fingers like living things. Each spell he cast carried the weight of future knowledge, techniques he had mastered through years of desperate survival, now being honed by a mind that understood their true potential. Most challenging was developing his combat intuition. He studied every servant, every guard, every noble who visited the estate, analyzing their movements, their tells, their weaknesses. Where others saw casual interactions, Cyan saw potential threats and opportunities. His mind became a battlefield where he fought imaginary opponents, preparing for conflicts that hadn't happened yet, but inevitably would. Months passed in a blur of pain, sweat, and relentless determination. There were moments when doubt crept in, when the voice in his head whispered that he was still the same failure he had always been. But those voices grew quieter as his body hardened and his skills sharpened. The awkward boy who had once cowered in his brother's shadow was becoming something else entirely. Something dangerous. The transformation became complete when news arrived that would shake the kingdom to its core. The demon war had begun. Reports flooded in from the borderlands of unprecedented devastation. Entire villages had been reduced to ash overnight, their populations either slaughtered or vanished without a trace. Families were torn apart as loved ones disappeared into the chaos, leaving behind only burning ruins and the acrid smell of sulfur. The kingdom's armies mobilized with desperate urgency, but it quickly became clear that this was unlike any conflict they had faced before. For Cyan, the war represented both opportunity and terror. His sister, the only member of his family who had ever shown him genuine love, refused to remain safely behind the estate's walls. Despite his protests, she joined the relief efforts, determined to help however she could. Watching her ride away with the supply convoys filled him with a protective fury he had never experienced before. When he finally reached the battlefield, Cyan found himself thrust into a nightmare of unprecedented scale. Demons and humans clashed in a symphony of steel and sorcery, while the very air seemed to vibrate with magical energy gone wild. Bodies littered the scarred earth, and the screams of the dying mixed with the inhuman roars of creatures from beyond the veil. Cyan fought with every skill he possessed, his darkness magic proving devastatingly effective against demonic foes. But as the days turned to weeks, he began to see the futility of their approach. Both sides were bleeding themselves dry in an endless cycle of violence and revenge. The war was consuming everything in its path, leaving only destruction and sorrow in its wake. Standing over yet another pile of corpses, both human and demon, Cyan made a decision that would have been unthinkable to his former self. There had to be another way to end this madness, and he knew exactly who held the key to stopping it all. He would seek out Valkyrian, the demon king himself, and attempt to negotiate peace. What happened next would shock both realms forever. The shadow magic wrapped around Cyan like a living cloak as he moved through demon territory. Every step took him deeper into a realm that humans feared to tread. The air itself felt different here, thick with otherworldly energy that made his skin crawl. But he pressed forward, driven by a desperate hope that words might succeed where swords had failed. The throne room of Valkyrian stretched before him like a cathedral of nightmares. Obsidian pillars rose toward a ceiling lost in darkness, and at the far end sat the Demon King himself. Valkyrian was everything the stories claimed, and worse. His massive frame dominated the throne, wings folded behind him like tattered storm clouds. Eyes like molten gold fixed on Cyan with predatory interest. "So," Valkyrian's voice rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder, "a human child thinks he can waltz into my domain and bargain with me?" The demon's laughter was sharp enough to cut glass. "You think you can negotiate with me?" Cyan forced himself to stand straight, despite every instinct screaming at him to flee. "If we don't," he said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded, "we both lose everything." The mockery faded from Valkyrian's expression. For a moment, the ancient demon studied the young human before him. "Elaborate." And so Cyan spoke. He talked about the villages burned on both sides, the children who would never see their parents again, the fields that lay fallow because the farmers had died in battle. He described the mothers who wept for sons lost to a war that seemed to have no purpose beyond perpetuating itself. "Both our peoples have suffered," Cyan continued. "Both have legitimate grievances. But continuing this cycle only creates more orphans, more widows, more graves." Valkyrian listened, his massive form unnaturally still. When Cyan proposed a truce, a ceasefire that would allow for genuine dialogue, the Demon King's eyes narrowed to burning slits. "And what guarantee do I have that this isn't some elaborate human deception?" Valkyrian demanded. Cyan met that terrifying gaze without flinching. "I'll stand as a bridge between our worlds. If either side breaks faith, you can hold me accountable." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Finally, Valkyrian spoke. "Very well. I will consider your proposal. But know this, human child. If there is betrayal, if this is some trick, you will learn why demons are feared in the darkest corners of your nightmares." Against all odds, the Demon King agreed. A fragile peace began to take shape. Reports from the front lines brought news that Cyan barely dared to believe. The fighting had stopped. Soldiers on both sides were laying down their weapons. Casualty reports dwindled to nothing. 3 weeks later, the Grand Hall glittered like something from a fairy tale. Crystals hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting rainbow light across polished marble floors. Human nobles in their finest silks mingled uncomfortably with demon dignitaries, whose otherworldly presence made the air shimmer. The banquet tables groaned under the weight of delicacies from both realms. Cyan watched from the sidelines as his sister moved through the crowd, her face bright with hope for the first time in months. Kron stood nearby, representing their father's household with diplomatic precision. Even the Duke himself had attended, though his smile never quite reached his eyes. Toast after toast was raised to unity, to understanding, to the future they might build together. For one shining evening, peace seemed not just possible, but inevitable. Cyan allowed himself to believe that his desperate gamble had paid off. Then the screaming started. The first strike came without warning. A demon lord collapsed, purple blood pooling beneath him. In the heartbeat of stunned silence that followed, chaos erupted. Tables overturned as beings dove for cover or reached for weapons. The beautiful hall became a battlefield in seconds. Cyan fought desperately to restore order, his voice lost in the mayhem. Magic crackled through the air as spells flew in every direction. The crystal chandeliers came crashing down in glittering explosions. Blood, both red and purple, stained the pristine marble floors. By dawn, the hall looked like an abattoir. Bodies lay twisted among the wreckage of what had been a celebration. The peace that had taken so much effort to build was shattered as thoroughly as the broken glass that crunched underfoot. The political aftermath was swift and merciless. Both sides pointed fingers, each claiming the other had orchestrated the attack. The fragile trust that had allowed the truce to exist crumbled into accusations and recriminations. Old prejudices that had been carefully set aside came roaring back stronger than ever. Cyan found his sister huddled in her chambers, eyes wide with trauma. Cran faced intense pressure from their father's political enemies, who blamed the family for the disaster. Everywhere Cyan looked, he saw the consequences of his failure written in grief and anger. The weight of responsibility crushed down on him like a physical force. Every death in that hall felt personal. Every shattered hope was a wound he had inflicted. The peace he had dreamed of seemed more impossible than ever. But from this failure, Cyan would find his true path. The final of Cyan's story begins with a moment of profound stillness. After watching everything he fought for crumble around him, Cyan finds himself alone with his thoughts, and for the first time in his life, he truly sees the pattern that has defined his existence. Standing amid the ruins of his efforts, Cyan begins to trace the threads of his journey. Born as a bastard son, he was rejected before he could even speak. Cast aside by his father, he was handed over to be molded into a weapon, an assassin who killed from the shadows. His family betrayed him when it suited their purposes, treating him as disposable. Even when he was given a second chance at the academy, he threw himself into proving his worth, desperately trying to show everyone that he belonged. The peace initiative he championed wasn't just about ending conflict. Deep down, it was another attempt to earn the validation he had always craved. He wanted to be seen as worthy, as someone who could bring light to the world despite his dark origins. But even that noble effort collapsed, leaving him with nothing but the bitter taste of failure. As these realizations wash over him, Cyan sees the truth with startling clarity. Every decision, every action, every choice had been driven by the same desperate need for approval. He had been a puppet dancing to the tune of other people's expectations, constantly reacting to their judgment rather than acting from his own will. Whether he was trying to prove himself to his father, his brother, the academy instructors, or even to himself, he had never truly chosen his own path. The weight of this understanding is crushing, but it's also liberating. For the first time, Cyan sees that he has been fighting the wrong battles. He has been seeking validation from people who would never see his true worth, trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for him. The pattern of seeking approval has kept him trapped in cycles of pain and disappointment. Something fundamental shifts within him at this moment. The desperation, the need to prove himself, the constant scramble for acceptance. It all falls away like chains breaking. Cyan reaches a breaking point where he simply says enough. No more. This isn't a moment of despair, but of declaration. Cyan makes a choice that will define the rest of his life. He decides that he will no longer seek approval from anyone. His worth isn't determined by his birth circumstances, his family name, or anyone else's standards. He will protect the people he cares about, but he will do it on his own terms, driven by his own values rather than the need for validation. For the first time, Cyan embraces every part of who he is without shame or apology. He is the bastard son, yes, but that doesn't diminish his value. He is an assassin trained in darkness, and those skills are part of his strength. He is a darkness mage, wielding power that others fear, but that power belongs to him. Every experience, every moment of pain, every hard-won lesson has shaped him into someone unique and formidable. This isn't about running away from his past or pretending it doesn't exist. Instead, it's about moving forward with complete acceptance of his journey and absolute determination to write his own future. Cyan finally understands that his worth was never in question. He simply needed to stop asking others to confirm it. The darkness that others saw as a curse, he now recognizes as his greatest strength. It taught him to survive when others would have crumbled. It gave him power when he had nothing else. It shaped him into someone who could stand alone if necessary, but who could also choose to stand with others out of love rather than need. In the final scene, we see Cyan walking toward the horizon, his sister at his side. This image is powerful because it represents his ultimate choice. Chosen family over blood family, freedom over approval, love over obligation. The sun rises before them, symbolizing a future that belongs entirely to them, one they will create together on their own terms. Cyan's transformation is complete. He has evolved from someone who desperately sought validation to someone who claims his own worth. He has moved from hiding in shadows to creating his own light. Most importantly, he has transformed from a victim of circumstances to the master of his own fate. His story reminds us that our past experiences shape us, but don't have to define us forever. True power comes from accepting every part of ourselves, even the parts that others might reject. Sometimes the bravest choice we can make is to stop seeking approval and start living authentically. Like Cyan, we all face rejection, betrayal, and pain in our lives. But we also possess the power to choose who we become despite these challenges. Our darkest moments can become our greatest strengths if we learn to embrace them rather than hide from them. Our destiny truly is ours to forge, and the most important approval we can seek is our own.